Right now, in southern New Mexico, the largest reservoir in the entire state has dropped to just 9.6% full, and most people outside of the Southwest have no idea it is happening. Elephant Butte Reservoir, the massive lake that was once the engineering wonder of the world, is nearly gone. The water that was supposed to feed 1 million people, hold a century of farming together, and keep a legal treaty with Mexico intact, is disappearing faster than anyone can stop it. Federal engineers are no longer talking about refilling the lake. They are talking about how to survive the summer on what little is left. And the worst part? Nobody is saying this is going to get better anytime soon. So here is the question that nobody wants to answer out loud. When a reservoir that feeds 1 million people hits 9.6%, what exactly comes next? In the desert just north of a small city called Truth or Consequences, New Mexico, there is a lake that was built to make the impossible possible. Farmers growing chili peppers and cotton in one of the driest corners of America. Cities running water taps in the middle of a desert that gets maybe 9 inches of rain a year. A river, the Rio Grande, delivering water across international borders to Mexico because a signed treaty from 1906 demands it. All of that, every farm, every faucet, every legal obligation rests on one body of water, Elephant Butte Reservoir. And as of June 18th, 2026, that body of water holds 9.6% of what it was built to hold. The water surface sits roughly 94 feet lower than where it is supposed to be. That is not a drought dip. That is not a rough season. 94 feet is roughly the height of a 9-story building, and that is how far the water line has fallen from where it belongs. That is a system that was built as the safety net for the entire Rio Grande Valley, and right now, that net has almost nothing left in it. The Bureau of Reclamation, the federal agency that runs the dam, has already issued projections showing the reservoir could fall to just 2% by late August. 2% of a lake that once held over 2 million acre-feet of water. 2 million acre-feet is enough water to cover the entire state of Rhode Island in water over 3 feet deep. And the people whose lives depend on what remains are not panicking in the streets. They are doing something in some ways scarier. They are doing the math, and the math does not work. In 1916, when the last rivet was hammered into Elephant Butte Dam, the engineers who built it believed they had solved the West's oldest problem. The Rio Grande did not run like a reliable faucet. It ran like a living thing, flooding in wet years, vanishing in dry ones. The valley below was rich soil, almost impossibly fertile for a desert, but it was useless without a steady water supply. So the federal government launched the Rio Grande project. The idea was elegant in its ambition. Build the biggest dam on Earth, bank every drop of snowmelt from the mountains of Colorado and New Mexico in good years, and release it in measured amounts during the dry ones. Elephant Butte Dam stood 301 feet tall. The reservoir behind it held more than 2 million acre-feet of water. When it was completed, it was the largest man-made reservoir on the planet. Not the largest in North America, not the largest in the Western Hemisphere, the largest anywhere on Earth. The whole system was designed around one central promise. Even when the sky fails you, the lake will not. For decades, that promise held. Wet years would push water into the reservoir, and the lake would swell, sometimes nearly to the brim. Dry years would draw it down, but the engineers had built in so much storage capacity that a single bad year, or even 2, would barely put a dent in it. The lake was the buffer between civilization and the desert. It was the bet that people could live here permanently. And for a century, that bet paid off. The last time the reservoir came close to dying was back in 1954, during the worst drought New Mexico had seen in recorded history. The water dropped to roughly 13,000 acre-feet before the rains finally came back. That was the floor. That was the worst it had ever gotten. Now, in June of 2026, the safety net that was built to handle drought is sitting at 9.6% full, and the engineers who run it are using a word they have almost never needed before: triage. By March of 2026, something had already gone wrong in the mountains long before most people noticed. The snowpack in the Rio Grande Basin, one of the key feeder systems for Elephant Butte, came in at just 4% of average by mid-April. 4%. That is not a below-average snow year. That is almost no snow at all. A normal winter in those mountains builds up a deep reservoir of frozen water that melts slowly through spring and summer, feeding the river for months. This year, there was almost nothing to melt. The headwaters of the Rio Grande itself registered at 13% of average. The Chemez Mountains, another critical drainage point, melted out so early and so fast that by the time the snow was gone, it had barely left a trace in the river below. Here is what happened, explained simply. When snowpack is thin and spring temperatures are warm, the snow does not melt slowly into the ground and seep into the river over weeks and months. It melts all at once. The water hits dry desert soil, and a huge portion of it evaporates before it ever reaches the Rio Grande. Gone before it even starts. On March 27, 2026, a stretch of the river near a small New Mexico community called Santa Acacia ran completely dry. Not low. Dry. That was the earliest the river had gone dry at that location in 30 years, and that was just the first problem. The second problem is the shape of the lake itself. Elephant Butte sits wide and shallow when the water level is low. A wide, shallow reservoir in a desert is an evaporation machine. The less water in the lake, the larger the share of it that lifts into the air every single day. The hole gets harder to escape the deeper you fall into it. The third problem was upstream. Colorado farmers began diverting from the river in mid-March. New Mexico's own irrigation season kicked off in late March. The straws were already in the river before the trickle of snowmelt even arrived. Not a dry year, not bad luck, not one failure. 3 systems failing at the same time in the same season. That is what drove the reservoir to 9.6%. And here is the part that keeps water managers up at night. Each of those 3 failures reinforces the others. Low snowpack means less inflow. Less inflow means the lake sits shallower. A shallower lake evaporates faster. More evaporation means less water available to offset the upstream diversions. The system does not fail in a straight line. It fails in a spiral. Each year that starts at a lower level makes the next year's evaporation problem worse. That is why the Bureau of Reclamation is projecting a drop to 2% by late August, even though it is only June. The math of a draining lake accelerates the longer it drains. By Memorial Day weekend of 2026, the gates at Elephant Butte Dam were releasing 750 cubic feet of water per second to meet downstream obligations. Only 50 cubic feet per second was flowing into the reservoir. Picture a bathtub with the drain wide open and a single garden hose trickling in. That is roughly the ratio. 15 times more water was leaving than arriving. In any accounting system, that equation ends only one way. Those downstream obligations are real, binding, and not negotiable. The Elephant Butte Irrigation District covers more than 90,000 acres of farmland, stretching from Hatch, New Mexico, all the way south through the valley. 90,000 acres is nearly the size of the entire city of Las Vegas. It is a massive patch of productive desert farmland, and every acre of it is legally entitled to its share of water from the reservoir. Hatch is known worldwide as the chile capital of the world, the place where green and red chiles have been grown for generations, where the harvest festival draws people from across the country, where an entire agricultural identity is tied to water from that dam. In a normal year, those farms receive 3 feet of water per acre. This year, 4 inches. Not 3 feet, 4 inches. To put that in plain numbers, a normal allotment is 36 inches. This year's allotment is 4 inches. That is roughly 11% of what the crops need to survive a full growing season. Gary Esslinger, who has managed the irrigation district for more than 30 years, called it a triage decision. Not a plan, not a strategy. Triage. That word comes from battlefield medicine. It means you stop trying to save everyone and start deciding who has a chance. That is the language being used by the person whose job is to keep farms alive in the Hatch Valley. And the farms are just the beginning of the obligation chain, because the water does not stop at the New Mexico border. In 1906, the United States signed a treaty with Mexico. Under that agreement, America is legally required to deliver 60,000 acre-feet of water to Mexico every single year, into a canal just above Ciudad Juarez. That treaty has been in force for 120 years. It does not pause for drought. It does not pause for reservoir levels. It does not care about snowpack percentages or evaporation rates. It is a legal obligation written into international law, and it runs directly through Elephant Butte. There is one clause. The treaty does acknowledge extraordinary drought. In a declared extreme drought, the water delivered to Mexico gets cut by the same proportion as the water cut for American farms below the dam. So if the farms are already down to 4 inches instead of 3 feet, Mexico's share shrinks proportionally too. But here is what they did not tell you. Even when both sides take cuts, the obligation still exists. The math still has to work. And right now, the math is being stretched in every direction at once. Farms getting a fraction of their water, a foreign treaty still running, and the reservoir falling toward 2% by late August. The water from Elephant Butte does not go directly to the farms or across the border. It travels south and gets caught in a smaller downstream reservoir called Caballo, where it is metered out like a pharmacist counting pills. Every single drop tracked, every release calculated to the cubic foot. That system was designed for scarcity. It was not designed for this. If that just blew your mind, every subscriber is automatically entered in our monthly giveaway for a branded hoodie. Details in the description. Downstream from Elephant Butte, past the farms of the Hatch Valley, past the pecan orchards and cotton fields, the Rio Grande continues south toward 2 cities that together hold nearly 1 million people. Las Cruces, New Mexico, sits along the river with a population approaching 120,000. El Paso, Texas, sits just below, with roughly 700,000 people. El Paso is one of the largest cities in the American Southwest, and it drinks from the Rio Grande every summer. That is not a figure of speech. The city's water utility pulls directly from the river and treats it for drinking water during the irrigation season. This is not the city's only water source. El Paso also draws from underground aquifers, the vast pools of ancient water stored beneath the Chihuahuan Desert. In fact, in recent years, El Paso has deliberately shifted more of its consumption to Rio Grande surface water, specifically to let those underground aquifers rest and recharge. The strategy is completely sound. When the river is running strong, use river water and save the underground reserves. When the river runs low, draw from the aquifers. But here is where the cascade starts. If Elephant Butte keeps falling and the Rio Grande keeps running low, and El Paso has to pull harder from those underground reserves, the aquifer drawdown accelerates. The underground backup gets used up faster than it can recover, and every year that the lake starts from a lower floor, the cycle becomes harder to break. It is not a cliff. It is a slow-moving squeeze, a tightening that is almost invisible from the outside, until the system is already in crisis. 700,000 people. A river running at 15 times more water out than in. An aquifer being asked to carry more weight than it was designed for. That is not an abstract risk or a distant projection. That is a system under active, measurable stress right now. And the thing about a slow cascade like this is that nobody pulls an alarm. There is no single moment when officials declare an emergency. There is just a number that ticks down, and a second number that ticks down behind it, and a third number that follows, until one day, the math simply does not balance anymore. That is what makes this story different from a hurricane or a flood. Those disasters announce themselves. This one is arriving quietly, column by column, in a spreadsheet that almost nobody outside the Rio Grande Valley is reading. By Memorial Day weekend, 2026, the state park at Elephant Butte had already become something strange to look at. In a normal year, Memorial Day at the lake draws around 60,000 visitors. Families on boats, campfires along the shore, jet skis carving up the blue water. This year, about 35,000 showed up. Nearly half the usual crowd simply did not come. The ones who did arrive found a lake that looked more like a series of muddy ponds connected by shallow channels. Only 2 of the boat ramps were still usable. The others sat high and dry on what used to be the lakeshore, but is now a cracked, pale expanse of exposed lakebed stretching toward water that has retreated hundreds of yards. Over Memorial Day weekend alone, park crews rescued roughly 20 boats. People had driven their boats onto what looked like open water from a distance and ran hard aground on mudflats that used to sit 40 feet underwater. 40 feet. That is the height of a 4-story building, and all of that water is just gone. The entire underwater geography of the lake is exposed. Islands that were never islands, channels that were never channels, ridges and flats, and old fence lines that last saw daylight decades ago. Jonathan Horsley, the state park superintendent, made a statement that was honest to the point of being almost jarring. He said plainly, "We do expect the water to go down. We are an irrigation reservoir." Not a tourist attraction, not a recreation lake, an irrigation reservoir. That clarification mattered. A marina operator named Neil Brown owns the historic stone cottages at the water's edge, the same cottages that were built for the construction workers who drove the last rivets into that dam back in 1916. Those cottages were placed there because they looked out over the largest lake in the world. Now, Brown says, they look out over a basin. In May of 2026, the United States Supreme Court approved a settlement in a water dispute that had been running for more than a decade. The case involved 3 states, New Mexico, Texas, and Colorado, all fighting over rights to the Rio Grande. The court's ruling required New Mexico to cut groundwater pumping along the river corridor by 18,200 acre-feet every year, phased in over the next decade. That sounds like a technical legal adjustment tucked away in a court filing. But here is where the story gets truly insane. The officials and water planners who analyzed how New Mexico could actually meet that reduction said the simplest available path was to buy out farm water rights and permanently retire the farmland. Not temporarily fallow it, not rotate it through a conservation program for a few years. Retire it. Forever. The plan to save the river involves permanently taking farms out of production. Families who have farmed the Hatch Valley for generations would be paid for their water rights, and the land would simply no longer grow anything. That is not a worst-case scenario. That is the plan on the table right now. And the deeper structural problem underneath all of this is a fact that no engineering project, no court ruling, and no amount of planning can fix. There is no upstream storage reservoir to draw from. There is no backup lake sitting in the mountains that can be opened up if Elephant Butte fails. The federal officials overseeing this system have said it plainly and without softening. The water that is gone is gone. There is no reserve account. There is no emergency supply sitting in a cupboard somewhere. The entire Rio Grande project was designed around the assumption that Elephant Butte would always be there, carrying decades worth of water in reserve. That assumption has been running on borrowed time through 3 consecutive dry years, 2024, 2025, and now 2026, and the reserve is nearly spent. Right now, the gates at Elephant Butte Dam are still running. Water is still flowing south. The trickle that is still arriving from the mountains is still being tracked to the acre-foot. Carolyn Donnelly, the Bureau of Reclamation's water operations supervisor, said it without softening. We're going into our 3rd year of very low flows. John Arizari, the acting area manager, said something worth sitting with for a moment. He said the goal is no longer to fill the lake. The goal is to stretch what is left. That sentence represents a fundamental shift from a system designed to fill, store, and release to a system being managed for simple survival. Remember that image from the very beginning of this story. A reservoir at 9.6%. Cracked lake bed. A water line retreating across pale, exposed mud. Boats being towed off flats that used to be 40 feet underwater. Stone cottages built for the men who built the greatest lake in the world, now looking out over a basin. That is not a dramatic flourish or a worst-case hypothetical. That is Tuesday at Elephant Butte in June of 2026. If the summer rains come, if the monsoon season delivers, as it sometimes does in New Mexico, the lake might limp to the end of the irrigation season and start next year from a slightly less desperate position. But slightly less desperate still means next year starts from a lower floor than this year started. And the floor keeps dropping. If the rains fail, if 2026 becomes the 4th year in a stretch that pushes the reservoir toward its 1954 historic low, there is no upstream backup. There is no emergency reserve. There is a dam and a shrinking basin and a chain of obligations that does not stop running. The Chile farmers in Hatch are making decisions right now about what to plant and what to let go. The water managers in El Paso are watching aquifer levels the way a nurse watches a patient's vitals, looking for the number that means the situation just changed. The stone cottages at the water's edge are still there, still looking out over the same horizon they have faced since 1916. The lake that was once the largest in the world is not there to meet them anymore. And every day that the gates keep running and the sky stays dry, the number gets a little smaller. Not a shortage, not a temporary setback, not something a good rainy season will erase. Gone. Slowly, measurably, irreversibly gone, unless something changes in the mountains. And if stories like this remind you that the systems we depend on are more fragile than most people think, grab your free disaster preparedness toolkit. The link is in the description.